Well, I wasn't expecting to make one of these videos so soon, and definitely not with Yooka-Laylee. I wanted to make a few more reviews before starting with discussion videos, but I have some opinions I want to put out there while it's still kinda relevant. If you happen to have lived under a rock for the past 2 years, Yooka-Laylee is the spiritual successor to the Banjo-Kazooie games made by the same people. They made a successful Kickstarter that I, unfortunately, wasn't able to support, but as someone who loved the old Rareware collectathons, I was super excited for Yooka-Laylee. Everything about this game was like a dream come true, and everyone was happy with what was presented, gamers and journalists alike. The game has had nothing but good press throughout its entire development. That is until recently. I won't go into the whole JonTron mess, because I really don't care, and everything about it is bullshit. The thing I am interested in are the reviews. Yooka-Laylee has gotten some rather mixed reviews, to say the least. I didn't let these reviews cloud my judgment, and was still excited to play the game. When it finally arrived, I spent the week playing through it, and I have completed it 100%. And, I really liked it. It was everything I ever wanted, and for the life of me, I don't understand some of the criticisms people have been giving this game. Is it perfect? No, of course not. No game is. There are some flaws, but what makes a game good is if the good aspects outweigh the bad, and I think this game definitely does that. Look, I can understand if you just don't enjoy the game. That's fine, we all have our preferences. But the thing that really bothers me is that people are calling the game bad. It's not a bad game. It really isn't. There's a difference between not liking a game and a game being just bad. I personally don't like Ocarina of Time or The Last of Us, but they're not bad games. If you want an example of a bad game, just wait until my next video. Anyways, I just feel like people are trying really hard to hate Yooka-Laylee. Some of the criticisms they bring up are valid, but they tend to be over-exaggerated. Actually, let's go through some of these criticisms. Let's start with something small. The voices are annoying, is something I hear getting brought up strangely often. So in Banjo-Kazooie, there wasn't full voice acting. It was the Nintendo 64. Games with full voice acting weren't common and usually came out late in its lifespan. So in Banjo, they used text with a few repeated sounds to represent the character's voice. Yooka-Laylee does the same thing. It has its own little charm to it, and people liked it, or at least I thought they did. Now people are suddenly saying that these are annoying. I don't know when it started, but before I've never heard anyone complain about it. But for some reason, people keep pointing this out as a negative for Yooka. Okay, look, they're not as annoying as people say, and even if they were, is that really such a big thing to criticize the game for? And even if it was, most of it can be skipped. Not all of it, but most. If it genuinely does annoy you, then fine. But don't exaggerate it so much. Okay, so the next criticism was a valid one. Emphasis on was. The frame rate being terrible is something that the critics brought up. I say it was valid because the console versions, especially the Xbox One, did have problems with slowdown. However, that doesn't entirely apply anymore because it was mostly fixed in a day one patch. There is a little bit of it there, but not to the point of it hindering the game. It is a bit annoying that they were given a game to review before the problems were fixed, and it would have been better if we didn't need a day one patch, and it is valid to criticize that, but it was fixed and I think the review should be updated to reflect that. Also, I want to point out that if you complain about having a day one patch fix issues like this with Yooka, but not whatever AAA game that does the same thing, and probably had even more problems to fix, you're a hypocrite. You're also a hypocrite if you complain about Yooka's frame rate, but overlook Breath of the Wild's frame rate. Especially since Yooka's genre is not one that really is hindered by lower frame rates. I mean, Jesus Christ, Banjo-Tooie's frame rate got pretty bad at times, but it's still a fantastic game, and it never really affects the gameplay other than being a bit annoying. Not saying they shouldn't try to make sure the frame rate is high and consistent, but it's been way too overblown. Next complaint is the camera apparently being bad. No it isn't. I mean, it's not the best camera ever made, and it could be improved, but it's not very bad at all. Okay, while flying, it's a bit hard to get it to show what you want, I'll admit. And there are times where it goes to a fixed angle if you get too close to certain parts. But those are the exception. I don't know what else to say, honestly. Except that to all the people who keep saying that the Banjo games and Donkey Kong 64's camera are also bad, no they're not. They work just fine. So this next one also comes up a bit, though not as much as the others. The controls aren't good. Like the last one, there's not much to say other than I think you're wrong. I didn't have much of a problem at all controlling the character. There are a couple mini-games that were hard to control, but they were just that, mini-games. It's a bit hard to be precise while flying, but you rarely need to be precise, and as a way of getting from place to place is really fun to use. The next point I don't understand at all. The combat is too simple. Really? That's what you're complaining about? Do you even know what game you're playing? Combat isn't the focus here, it's the exploration. If it had really tough enemies that required long combos or something, all it would do is slow down the pace to a halt. There's a reason platformers don't have intricate combat systems, because that's not the point. When Sonic games gave enemies health bars, or added God of War-like combat, or just made enemies more important than just being obstacles, people complained because it bogged down the pace. Mario doesn't have complex combat. Crash Bandicoot doesn't have complex combat. Banjo-Kazooie and Donkey Kong, both Country and 64, don't have complex combat, so why the fuck does Yooka-Laylee suddenly need it? The challenge comes from the exploration, the platforming, and the bosses. If that is something you don't like, then I suggest you play something else. Okay, next up is the transformations being underwhelming. Banjo-Kazooie had parts where you transformed into something else and got a few collectibles with them, and Yooka-Laylee brought them back. But of course, since it wasn't done completely perfectly, it's now some big problem. I'll admit, the first three, especially the very first, aren't that interesting. But two things. One, if you try to say that Banjo did it better, I'm gonna stop you right there and say no it didn't. The transformations in Banjo barely had anything to do. Most of them just let you go through small holes and walk on hazardous water. Like, that is literally all the pumpkin did, and the walrus. The others had at least one other thing they could do, but you still only got like 2 or 3 jiggies out of them tops. Banjo-Tooies were done a bit better, but not that much. And 2. The 4th and 5th are pretty good, especially the helicopter. It's my favorite out of all the games. It gets a lot to do, and it's just fun to use. Same with the boat, although to a lesser extent, but you fight a boss with it. Could they have been improved? Yes, and I was hoping they would improve more than they did. But the transformations were never supposed to be these big things. They were just there to add some variety, and I think they do that well enough. Okay, now for one of the bigger complaints. The minigames are terrible. And honestly, as much as I want to defend everything about this game, I do actually kind of agree with this point. It's still exaggerated, but I don't really like the minigames either. So the minigames come in 2 forms. The minecart challenges and their extra arcade games. The minecart levels aren't terrible, but every minecart level in any Donkey Kong game, be it the old Country trilogy, the new Retro Studios Country games, or even 64s, are much more fun than in Yooka. They are fairly simple early on, but the later ones can get really tough. As for the arcade games, it really depends on which game. The first one isn't very fun. It doesn't control well, and it's just annoying. But the time limit is pretty generous, so it's not like you will be playing for long. The next 2 are actually pretty simple and kind of fun. Not bad at all. The final 2 are actually difficult. They go on for too long and it's easy to screw up, so I won't defend them. But I'm gonna let you know a little secret. You don't have to play them if you don't want to. See, that's the beauty of collectathons. You don't need to collect everything to beat the game. If you run into a hard or annoying minigame, you can skip it. Sure, you can still criticize them, but to write off the entire game because of optional content is just absurd. Next up are the bosses not being good. And I also kind of agree with this criticism. The first 3 bosses are pretty simple, and in the second's case tedious, but the World 5 boss is more interesting, and the final boss is actually pretty good. Although the World 4 boss was a pain in the ass, mostly because you fight him on a minecart. Overall, I do agree that the bosses are rather weak for the most part, but again, you don't need to fight them if you don't want to. Except for the final boss, of course. Now this is one I find funny. The worlds are too big. Yeah, okay. I find that funny because of how popular open world games are nowadays. It's okay when these games have big worlds, but oh, when Yooka does it, it's bad. For fuck's sake, Breath of the Wild's world is massive and everyone loves that game. Okay, yes, the worlds are pretty big. Bigger than Banjo-Tooie's worlds. But why is that a problem? I'd understand if there wasn't a lot to do in them, but there is a lot to do. I'll admit, I do miss the warp pads from Donkey Kong 64 and Banjo-Tooie, but it really doesn't take that long to navigate, especially after getting the flight ability. If you want, you can just do the absolute minimum required to get the flight ability, and then go back and explore. Again, that's what makes this genre so good. You have the freedom to go at your own pace. The worlds are designed very well, and if you actually pay attention to your surroundings, you shouldn't get lost. I found that each world does have distinct landmarks that make it easy to know where you are. Maybe I can understand getting a bit lost in the swamp level, but not for very long. The point is to explore the worlds, and the more exploration, the better. With 5 worlds, if they were small, the game would be short. Some may say that it would be better if the worlds were smaller, but there were more of them, and to that I would agree, but what we got is not bad at all. Another complaint I don't get is that it's too much like Banjo. Yeah. That's the fucking point. How is it that throughout the entire development, it's Kickstarter and advertisements saying that it's basically going to be Banjo 3, it's going to be just like those games, that you somehow expected it to not be like that? We wanted another game that was like Banjo-Kazooie, Banjo-Tooie, and Donkey Kong 64. That's why people backed the game. That's why I was so very excited for this game. And we did get what we wanted. So why is this a common complaint? Like, for fuck's sake, we haven't had one of these kinds of games in years. Banjo-Tooie came out in 2000. That's 17 years ago. But it's bad that we get another game like this and it's not completely different. But when fucking Mario innovates much less and in a much shorter span of time, it's okay. Because it's Mario and Nintendo can do no wrong. What about Shovel Knight? What did Shovel Knight do that was new or innovative? Not much. But everyone loves that game while saying it didn't need to invent the fucking wheel to be good. I'm not knocking Shovel Knight. Shovel Knight is fantastic. But the double standards are just annoying. And Yooka-Laylee does things differently from the others, if you actually played the game. But the thing that really grinds my gears are when I hear things like, it's dated, or it's too retro, it's too old school for its own good. This came from an actual review, and it pisses me off. As if newer games are inherently better than older ones. Fuck off. I really hate it when people say shit like something is dated or hasn't aged well. Like, what the fuck does that even mean? Just because it's older design doesn't mean it's inferior to what we have now. And then I saw an image from, I think it was Kotaku. Not too sure, but I feel dirty just thinking about going to that site to confirm that's where it's from. But anyways, it went something like this. Maybe those older games were never any good to begin with. Fuck you, whoever said that. Who are you to say those games were bad? They were great games. Just because they aren't super easy and handholdy and require you to pay the fuck attention and actually think doesn't make them bad. Okay, those were most of the complaints I've seen. There may be more, like some people don't like the quizzes, for God forbid that you actually pay attention to the game you're playing. However, there are a couple people I want to bring up who have criticized the game. First is Video Game Donkey. Now, I love Donkey's videos, but he was pretty harsh on Yooka-Laylee. A lot of his complaints I already talked about, so I'm not going to do a response to it or even get into it other than I just disagree with most of what he said. I bring him up because I see a lot of people link to his video anytime someone defends the game as a way to somehow prove people who liked the game were wrong instead of actually playing the game and forming your own arguments. One thing I will respond to is at the end he brings up a bunch of other platformers to play instead, but most of the games he lists are nothing like Banjo-Kazooie. I didn't get Yooka-Laylee to play games like Mario Galaxy. I got it to play a game that was like Banjo-Kazooie, of which there are very few nowadays, at least until Hat in Time. And the other person I want to mention is Jim Sterling. Jim fucking Sterling. So Jim Sterling is someone I like sometimes, and this isn't one of those times. So Jim made the harshest review for the game. Not the first time he's done that, but I'm not gonna say he gave it a 2 just to stand out and get attention. I don't doubt he didn't like the game. I also don't doubt that he probably exaggerated. A 2 is pretty fucking low. I'd expect a game like fucking Superman 64 or Bubsy 3D to have a score that low. Even if you don't like the game, you have to admit that's going too far. But I'm not here to argue about scores. I fucking hate review scores and wish Metacritic would just burn down. That's why I actually have been countering actual criticisms instead of spending the entire time bitching that Jim gave it a 2. As for the contents of his review, obviously I disagree completely. I could probably very easily pick apart every bit of his review, but I'd rather not waste my time. Much like how he found it hard to get through the game, I had a hard time reading his review. I pretty much covered everything he criticizes already, so no need to go in depth. He goes on about it being dated, and he can't comprehend how to control Yuka, and that the game doesn't handhold him and shit like that. At one point he says Laylee is fucking racist because she makes fun of other characters' appearances. You know, like how fucking Kazooie did? She's not racist, she's just a jerk to everyone. Again, like Kazooie. He does say he's being facetious, but then follows it by saying she really does come off as hateful. So take from that what you will. I don't care. It seems he doesn't even like old school 3D platformers, which begs the question why he even backed it. But I'm not gonna let it get to me anymore. I know what I like, and I really like Yooka-Laylee, and I certainly don't need validation from critics like these to enjoy something. Even though the game has been getting a bunch of negative attention, there are plenty of people who do enjoy the game as much as I do, and that makes me happy. Once again, the game isn't perfect. I didn't expect it to be. There are flaws. Flaws I would indeed like to be fixed in hopefully a sequel. I do wish Playtonic the best of luck for their future projects, and not to be demoralized by some of the harsher criticism, but instead use it to improve. And for people who genuinely don't enjoy this game, that's fine. I don't have a problem if you don't like it. But I do have a problem with you saying the game is bad. It seems that people really want to hate this game for some reason, and get angry when people do like it. Whatever happened to simply letting people enjoy something? There's always gotta be a hate bandwagon. I'm not saying don't criticize it, do so, but don't over-exaggerate it. That's all I wanted to say. I hope you enjoyed the video. I'd like to have some actual discussions instead of shit-flinging. And stick around my channel. I'm working on a pretty big review that I hope to get out soon. It's quite something. But until then, I'm the Red Guy, and I hope you have a good day today.